President of the Foundation for Peace, Harmony and Good Governance. Professor Suman Khanna Agarwal, again the founder and President of the Foundation's Shanti Sahyog. Let me start this session with an anecdote. An American medical doctor, friend of mine, Arthur Brownstein, was here in India a few years ago, and I was trying to take him in Delhi to some of the places worth seeing, and one of the places to which I took him was the Gandhi Memorial at Birla House on 30 January mark. Now here there is a room in which Mahatma Gandhi used to sit and then walk from there to the prayer meeting in an open area in a ground. And when we reached that place where in that open field Gandhiji fell to an assassin's bullet in 1948, this man started speaking in a choked voice, and then he said, "Ramesh, don't mind, let me stand here for a short while and let me cry, let me get it out." And within a few seconds, this 6.5 foot tall, hefty American was sobbing like a child. Now, here is this person who has come from the other side of the globe, and while standing at a place where Mahatma Gandhi fell, saying, "Hey Ram," more than 60 years ago, but that event is enough to make this person from across the globe cry like a child. That was Mahatma Gandhi, and that is his global impact. So it is not just in India, it is all over the world. And it was not just when he was around. In fact, with the passage of time, it continues to grow. Aurobindo has said that there are only two judges whose joint verdict cannot easily be disputed. And they are the world and time. Which means that if a person's influence is confined only to a small area, to a few faithful followers, that may not be enough to judge the person. And if a person's influence is widespread, but it reaches a crescendo for a short period and then comes down, when the person is gone, his influence is also gone, again, one can doubt the merits of that person. But the joint verdict, as Aurobindo says, of the world and time is seldom wrong. It can generally not be disputed. So this anecdote was just sort of an illustration, but we know how Mahatma Gandhi's influence continues to persist and grow all over the world, how he has influenced people like Nelson Mandela and Martin Luther King, and just about any place in the world, any continent, you will find roads named after him, statues built in his honor, although he wouldn't have liked it very much. But the spontaneous outpouring of love and affection that exists for him throughout the world and continues to exist speaks for itself. And still we are debating the relevance of Mahatma Gandhi today. Let's see why that is so. Mahatma Gandhi stood for a set of values, and more than preaching them, he practiced them. He lived those values, and to practice exactly what one preaches is in itself a great value. But then when a value is practiced, it acquires a form. A value is only an idea, but its practice has to be given a shape. And the shape that it acquires, the form that it takes, depends on the period in history when that person is practicing that value, the place where he is practicing it, the conditions and circumstances under which he is practicing it. And therefore, the exact form that that practice of that value takes has only a temporal significance, and with passage of time and change of place, its relevance can seem to fade away. But the value which was behind, which was underlying that practice, that can be much more lasting. And in fact, the values for which Mahatma Gandhi stood are eternal, although the form in which he practiced those values might have had only temporal significance, and that might appear relevant today. Therefore, what we need to do is to go behind the form and look at the value. For example, he dressed himself only in a dhoti, a loincloth. Now, we can have a debate on whether that is the right way to dress or not. But let's look at the values behind it. It had basically two values behind it. One was simplicity, and that is something which one cannot have a quarrel with, especially these days when there is so much of conspicuous consumption in the society. And the second value underlying that dress of his was his concern for his fellow beings. There's a story of a young boy once getting a little surprised and feeling bad that this person, this great man, is dressed only in this sparse dress, just a dhoti. So he told him that my mother can stitch kurtas, so she can stitch a kurta for you. So Gandhiji said she will not be probably able to stitch as many kurtas as I want. So this boy said, no, she can stitch any number you like. How many kurtas do you want? He said, well, there are 40 crores of people in this country, and till each one of them is properly dressed, I will not feel like wearing a kurta. Now this boy didn't know what to say. Now, so behind that dress was the core value of simplicity and his concern for others. Now this is something which we cannot argue with. This is something which will be always relevant. This is the key to any healthy ethical society. Love is that key which breaks the barrier between individuals. And it is his love for his fellow beings, feeling their pain, feeling their sorrow, as Karthikeyanji just mentioned, that will always be relevant. Because these two things, the basic ego-driven personality, which is a fundamental part of us because that is how, unfortunately, we are constituted, and the impulse of love, which also fortunately has been planted in us by the divine, are two forces which we have to understand. Ego divides, whereas love unites, and therefore the only antidote we have to all the evil, injustice, and suffering and misery in the world is trying to keep this ego under restraint, if not eliminating it altogether, and replacing it with its opposite, and that is love. And that is what his simple dress represented. And that is why Rabindranath Tagore, who gave him also the title of Mahatma, said that the Mahatma has won the heart of India with his love. Now let's take a few more values and his practices. When it came to machines, two of his favorite machines were the bicycle and the typewriter. The bicycle still continues to be relevant, and with all the pollution that we have, it keeps getting a lot of sympathy and revival from time to time. But the typewriter has now more or less become a museum piece. But that doesn't mean that we have to argue about the relevance of Mahatma Gandhi because he liked the typewriter and whether the typewriter is relevant or not. If Mahatma Gandhi had been around even today, even he would have probably liked to use a computer. So that is not the point. The point is that what we should be doing is, when we are trying to look at any piece of technology or any machinery or any gadget, is to take a conscious decision whether embracing that particular piece of technology will bring about a significant and appreciable change in the quality of our life. Will it improve the quality of our work? Is it something which is absolutely essential? What will be its social impact? Will it create jobs? Will it take away jobs? Now, these are the types of things we should be asking, and then decide, take a conscious decision whether we to adopt or not adopt such a piece of technology. And that is becoming, again, very important now. It's extremely relevant because on one hand, we are accumulating so much of electronic waste, which is threatening the environment. On the other hand, the companies which manufacture these electronic instruments, the computers and the tablets and the iPads and so on, they are working on the philosophy of what is called planned obsolescence, which means that there's an inbuilt plan in their companies to keep coming up every few months with a new model which has a few additional features, which goes a little beyond the previous model, highlight those advances, exaggerate them, and then induce and inspire people to get those latest models. Otherwise, they are threatened that they will be considered out of date they will be considered as if they are left behind in this race for having the latest gadgets, which are so much better than the previous ones. Now, in an era when we have this planned obsolescence coming from the industry, we need to make such a conscious choice. So it is this conscious choice of what we want to embrace and what we want to reject. That is behind his admiration of the bicycle and the typewriter. And the typewriter, by the way, I used to say that he loves because it helps him compensate for his poor handwriting, which again, was one of his values, extreme humility. In one of his interactions with Dilip Kumar Roy, who was a disciple of Sri Aurobindo, he's told Dilip Kumar Roy, Dilip Kumar Roy had gone to Europe, and there he was asked many questions about Mahatma Gandhi. So he told him that you should go to Europe sometimes, people are very interested in you. So to which Mahatma Gandhi replied in a letter, something to the effect that what people think about me in Europe is exaggerated, and probably it is a result of their not knowing me enough. If I go there and they know me properly, probably they will no longer be thinking the same. And he said, I'm not saying this out of any humility. I know exactly that this is the situation. And that was in 1927. So even in 1927, he had a global impact. And he, dismissed it so lightly. Well, they don't know me enough. That's why they are so interested. That was his humility. Then, again, khadi and charkha. Now, again, we don't have to go by the outer form, but what lies behind it is a feeling of patriotism. We should try and encourage indigenous industry. We should encourage cottage industry, the industry which is managed by the downtrodden, and instead of just the industry which is supporting the rich, which will grow rich, further rich by if we continue to use their products. So, it is that which was behind this, and not we don't have to sort of take literally exactly what it is. And it is not that if he was, he had this Swadeshi spirit, he was xenophobic, he was against anything foreign. He had an international outlook. Amongst his friends were people like C.F. Andrews. Amongst his disciples were people like Miraben, who came from the UK. So it's not that he was close to influences from outside, but then he quite rightly said, we are open to influences from outside, from anywhere in the world, and we'll accept everything good that comes from anywhere, but in the process, we should not be blown off our feet. Now, that is an approach which nobody can really have any argument with, and that will be relevant for all times. And so his values were, in fact, for all time, and not something which was only of significance when he was around. Honesty. As a child, he gave evidence of it, There was an inspector who came to the school, and he asked them to write to dictation, and one of the words, kettle, Mahatma Gandhi, then Mohandas didn't know how to write, so he made a mistake. The teacher pointed out to him that, look at the boy next to you and you can correct your spelling. But he didn't. And he was very pained that after the inspector went away, the teacher in fact told him, I even pointed out to you to copy from the next boy, you didn't even do that, you're so stupid. So he was pained that the teacher who should be inculcating the right values is himself trying to make us dishonest. Dishonesty goes beyond just speaking the truth, because one can just stay silent. But then here, he had the courage to do what was right, and that is what honesty is about, and he knew that he had done the right thing. And influence of Mahatma Gandhi and other great people who worked for the freedom of the country was still around when I was a child. And probably that is why, I used to hear some type of expressions which have more or less become extinct now. I grew up in a refugee colony. My parents migrated from what is now Pakistan. And most of our neighbors were in government service, and they went to the office a distance of about 5 or 6 kilometers by bicycles. Now, if anybody within the area, and that was only occasional, once in a while, very few, moved upwards, and moving upwards those days means now instead of going on a bicycle, you go on a motorcycle. people used to wonder, where did he get so much money from? And as if, responding to this man, some would, say in a thunderous voice, I'll go on a bicycle to the office all my life if necessary, but I'll not accept a bribe. Now, that is the type of expressions we don't hear about anymore. Instead, people are measuring their social status in terms of the type of car that they drive. That is a much more common expression than anybody talking in these terms. Now, which means that somewhere we have lost those values with the passage of time, and that's what makes him even all the more relevant. And to be able to say that I'll go on a bicycle instead of using a motorcycle needs not only honesty, but also it needs self-control, a conscious acceptance of an inconvenience. And that self-control, again, Mahatma Gandhi embodied. When he went to England with the firm determination to stay a vegetarian, he started having boiled spinach. And its taste was insipid. But then he says in his autobiography that gradually I started finding that it was quite acceptable. And he came to the conclusion that the true site of taste is not the tongue, but the mind. And same about sex. Two basic instincts, you see, which are the most difficult to control: food and sex. Again, at the age of 40, he decided no more sex, and he stood by it. Total self-control. These are the values, which are eternal in nature. Non-violence. What at the base of his non-violence was to show that physical force, brute force, is not the strongest power that we have in the world. There is a power higher than that, and that is the power of truth. Because when you are saying something true, there is a strength in it. And that's the difference between force and power. So truth has a power. And second important thing that was embodied in his nonviolent methods was that we should appeal to the finer feelings of the opponent. Which means that he saw the opponent also with sympathetic eyes as someone who may appear to us to be entirely in the wrong, who may appear to be very cruel to us, but even that person has somewhere deep within some finer feelings. And therefore, if we appeal to those, even he can undergo a change of heart. Now, this fact that we all have these finer feelings is because we all have a soul. The soul may be quiet, the soul may be silent, the soul might have gone to sleep, the soul might speak only in very faint whispers which we don't even listen to, but the soul is there within all of us. And this is something which is very basic to education, especially the education which Aurobindo and the mother have talked about, that we should build up our system of education on the basis of making the child aware that we have this voice somewhere deep within us, and each one of us has that voice, that if I do something right, then I get a sense of joy and I get lasting mental peace. If I do something wrong, that itself makes me uneasy and I lose my peace. Now, this is an inbuilt system of reward and punishment which each one of us has, which means these finer feelings reside within each one of us, and we have to awaken them. And that is what education is about. And only a society which is built on this type of an education can be a healthy society with low crime rate, if not entirely crime-free, because much of crime thrives on the idea that if nobody finds it out, I can get away with it, which means that we expect a punishment only from outside. In childhood, we think that if I do something wrong, the teacher or the parent will punish me. And when we grow up, we think if I do something wrong, the police will punish me. Police and the judge, they will punish me. Which means that the punishment has to come from outside. But then we forget that we have an inbuilt system of punishment. I'll feel uneasy, I'll feel guilty, I'll lose my mental peace. That is a punishment we are not so conscious of. And that is why so much crime goes on, because the amount of crime that is detected is only a very small fraction of the crime that is committed. And the crime that is punished is even a smaller fraction of the crime that is detected, which Mr. Karthikeyan, as a man from the police background, will not only support me, but I've seen people with that background, in fact, say that we people work so hard to catch the criminal and then the court lets them off. The evidence is not enough, because everybody is innocent unless proved guilty. Now, which means that the amount of crime that is punished is even a smaller fraction of the crime that is detected. Which means that most of the time, the criminal who commits the crime, thinking that nobody will find it out, I'm doing so cleverly that it will never be found out, most of the time, his calculation works and he gets away with it. And that is why crime continues. He's not aware of that inbuilt system of reward and punishment which resides within us. And that is what non-violence is about, appealing to the finer feelings of even the opponent. Now again, how Gandhiji dealt with people within his own group who were opposed to him. Again, Dilip Kumar Roy, mentions, he has a fine book, on Among the Great, where he has interactions with 5 great men, one of whom was Mahatma Gandhi, and he has documented his interactions very carefully and then shown those interactions to the person concerned who approved it, made any changes if necessary, and then he published them in that book, Among the Great. So there, he says that once he landed up in Mahatma Gandhi's house, when there were a large number of people from the Congress itself there, all trying to convince Mahatma Gandhi about something which he was not in agreement with. And what was Mahatma Gandhi's method of dealing with them? Serenity and patience. Listening out to all of them with great infinite patience, which means he was not in a hurry to reply. He was not in a hurry to convince. He was not in a hurry to oppose. And again, something extremely relevant when we look at the type of discourse that takes place these days, and we talk about so much tolerance and intolerance. And here was this man who ultimately always, as Dilip Kumar Roy says, ended up getting his way. But then he let it take its time. He was extremely serene and patient. Not only that, he was also humorous. He had not lost his sense of humor during that entire interaction. And in fact, when Dilip Kumar Roy reached there, he cracked one of his first jokes because, he was very fond of Dilip Kumar Roy singing to him and playing music. Dilip Kumar Roy was also a musician and a singer. So he expected him to go with a musical instrument, the tanpura. So he appeared there in this room in front of Mahatma Gandhi without the tanpura. So what did Gandhiji tell him? Where is your instrument of torture? Again, a sense of humor. So he said, sir, I thought you would be busy with these serious discussions, so you will not have time for music. So he said, no, there's always time for music. And then he looked at Deshbandhu Chittaranjan Das and told him, now you are his jailer, make sure that he doesn't go away without singing. A sense of humor, the way he used to speak. And it would come as a surprise to some of you that he was in fact extremely fond of music as well as art. People, feel that he was a dead serious person, but he was not only had a sense of humor, he had a great appreciation for music and art, although he confessed that I'm not a musician, I don't know the technicalities, but that is not necessary to be able to appreciate music. I appreciate music, I love it. And when it came to art, he said, well, I don't have any paintings in my room. That is true in my house. But he says, that is not because I don't approve of art, but that is because we don't need them. Why do we need art on the walls? He said, for that matter, why have walls at all? And even if there are walls, why not have big windows? He says, can anybody paint anything better than nature? Look at a beautiful sunrise, sunset, snow-clad mountains, leaves and flowers and so on. Can anybody paint anything better than that? So when nature has provided such beautiful paintings, why do I have to put paintings in my room? So that was his explanation. It's not that he didn't approve of art. So in short, I've tried to bring out some of the values for which Gandhiji stood and how sometimes we forget their relevance because we look at only the form and the shape that he gave them while practicing them. Towards the end of his life, he was asked for a message. And he said, my life is my message. Now, that looks like a pompous statement, but it was not a pompous statement. It was a mere statement of facts. Because rather than preach, he practiced, which in fact is much more difficult than preaching. And again, let me conclude with something from Sri Aurobindo. Sri Aurobindo says that if we accept something, we should accept it because we understand it. And then comes something even more significant. And if we reject something, that should also be because we understand it. So, before we decide to accept or reject the relevance of Mahatma Gandhi today, first let's make sure that we understand Mahatma Gandhi and understand the values that were behind the external form and shape that they took in his life, because that is so visible, because he lived an open life, he didn't preach much, and he gave a certain shape to the values for which he stood. So let's look at the values for which he stood behind the form that they took, and we'll find that all those values are extremely relevant in not only today, they are for all time to come. Thank you.